That's good. Hi, folks. We've got a bunch of people coming in. Thank you so much. You probably noticed that we are recording. Just give it a minute more, make sure everybody's connected who's joining us so far. And we've got one more person still connecting to audio. Okay, looks like everybody who started now is connected. So you did notice, I think everybody is muted. So we'll keep it that way for a little bit, and then our guest speaker can let you know when she's ready for some questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Kay Ogden. I'm the Vice Chair of CCLT. I'm also the Executive Director and CEO of Eastern Sierra Land Trust. And I'm currently serving on California Natural Resource Agency's Partnership Coordinating Committee, which is being tasked with helping CNRA share concerns from my community, which is you guys, back to CNRA, and information from CNRA to this community. So if you've got any questions on that, please let me know. But almost as soon as the California Nature Map went live, I know I had concerns, and I know I heard a lot from other folks that there were concerns about why our protected lands weren't being shown on the map. And believe me, CNRA heard it, and part of their solution was earlier this year, they entered into a contract with GreenInfo to help with clearing up this. And part of it is the data, maybe there might be missing data, or there's data that needs to be updated, and or there are questions on the GAP codes. So today is one of the first webinars or workshops that CCLT is hosting with GreenInfo and Amanda, sorry, I just hired a new staff member called Andrea. I'm all, so today's one of our first workshops, and I would like to introduce Amanda here in just a minute. I wanted to see if there were any other CCLT board members that I could introduce. I'm not seeing any right now. If I miss, just pop into the chat and we'll introduce you at a break. I do want to introduce Claire, who is working for CCLT, and she's helping a lot with the background today. So if you want, during the presentation, feel free to put questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring it, and then Amanda will also be taking some questions, and Claire and I can help. A quick little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over is the webinar is being recorded. The slides will be made available. Submit your questions in the chat, and we are repeating this webinar tomorrow at 1 p.m. Thank you so much, Amanda and Claire. And we'll be announcing future webinars per your requests and as they're set. Oh, hi, Liz. So right now, I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce Amanda. And even though I've recently asked her, I'm going to hope I say your last name right. Amanda Kochanek. Kochanek. Oh, darn.
Impressively close.
And she is the Senior Project Manager and Geospatial Data Analyst at GreenInfo Network. And just a smidge about Amanda is that she leads a variety of project teams with a focus on data collection and analysis. Personal specialties include organization of complex projects. Thank you very much. I know this is one of them. And data and identification of systems for automation and demographic analysis. She's been integral to the development and continued success of CPAD and CCED over 2 decades. Frequently, her projects involve demographic analysis, equity and access to parks and open spaces, and reducing youth exposure to tobacco products and advertising. Wow, Amanda. And she likes to have fun too. And in her fun time, she likes to cross country and downhill ski. as well as read and embroider. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here, Amanda, and we're just so grateful. So I'll turn it over to you and I'll go on mute.
Great. Great. Thank you for the introduction, and CCLT for letting us come talk to all of you. I'm super excited to go through this. I know we're all anxious to have the information in CNRA's 30 by 30 data be as accurate as possible. And as we all saw with the first cut, we're not there yet. So today is the first in multiple meetings of reaching out and telling you how we hope to do that and that we need your help. You all are the experts on your own lands, and we want your input directly from you whenever possible. But we also want to make that as easy as possible. So housekeeping, Kay already went through these, but quickly, we are recording the webinar today. That'll be posted. If you need to reference that in the future, I will make the slide deck available. So if you are interested, you can see any of the images or links and things into the future. If you have questions that come up, you can go ahead and submit those in the chat, and Claire and Kay will be monitoring those. If we start to have a few at different breakpoints, we could stop in the middle or we can go till the end. We'll just see how that goes. And then we'll be doing the same webinar tomorrow at 1 p.m. So if for whatever reason you want to share that with anyone, feel free to let them know. And we do anticipate this is one of many. Some of this work will be complex and require more conversational elements. And so we will have future webinars, and we will make sure to announce those through CCLT and make sure that this group of organizations is having their needs met as we go through this process. So agenda for today, we'll go through the basics of 30 by 30. We're not going to go super deep, but making sure we all are on the same high level starting point. We'll talk about what are protected lands in California and what are the databases that feed into that, which are going to be CPAD and CCED. I assume a lot of you have already heard of those. A lot of your organizations are actually the key data elements to the lands protected within those, but we'll give you more information for those who want a little more background and understanding. We'll also talk about how 30 by 30 has determined it's going to measure biodiversity protection. And then we'll go through some of the other uses of CPAD and CCED. One key element is these databases have been around for about 2 decades, and updating your information will not only assist in 30 by 30 efforts, but other local and state efforts that are happening. So we'll talk about some of that. And our process there is to try to make sure that updates and information you provide in one place roll out to multiple avenues. And then we'll talk about some of the options you'll have in terms of giving us feedback. So if you want to improve or update any of your lands or how they're categorized within 30 by 30, we'll give a very high level overview of how we foresee that process. And this is one that we'll start to get more in depth as we have additional webinars. So I wanted to start off today with asking just a quick poll for folks. How familiar are you with 30 by 30? And Claire, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll, I know, or actually, maybe I can do that from here. Has that been launched? Okay, yep. We have responses coming in, so I'll give folks a minute. But so asking, are you familiar with 30 by 30? Either you've never heard of it, you have, a little bit familiar, you've read about it, or maybe even used it, or you reference it pretty frequently in your work. And it looks like we're about 85% complete. Wow, good participation. I love it. 88% complete. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click in poll here, and hopefully this will now share the results. Happy to see everyone's heard of it at least. Totally fine that a few of us haven't heard all that much about it. And then sort of a pretty even spread between being somewhat familiar and quite familiar with it. So thank you for that. So now we'll go into, oh, I don't know what this drawing is. Well, we can ignore that for now. Let me just see if I can clear that.
Liz, could you go in and see if you could delete it? I saw Liz's name pop in by accident.
Okay, well, and while I do that, so 30 by 30, as most of you all know, is conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal water by the year 2030. So since most of us are familiar with that, we probably don't need a whole lot of detail, but it is a executive order that was made by Governor Newsom back in 2020. And so my next question, and I promise there won't be a ton of polls, but just a few in the beginning, but I was curious what people think our current status is. So as of right now, what percentage do you, oh shoot, I think I am relaunch. Okay, where do you think we are now? Sorry, I had to relaunch there. If you entered your answer, you'll need to resubmit. But do folks think we're at 19%, 21, 24, 26, or 28% protected in California? Let's see, we're up to 70, 80%. Give it a few more seconds here for people to enter. All right, I'm going to end that poll, but it looks like people are ending up around 21 is the most common, followed by 24. So where we actually are is 23.7, so 24%. So folks were a little underestimating. I will say that this 23% is the number provided by CNRA in their data. So this number is anticipated to go up both as we improve and correct data. So many of you might have seen your lands and thought, well, mine should have been included. So that will start to push this number up, as well as we protect more lands across the state, the numbers will go up. But as of the last release that CNRA put out, we were at 24% for the state. So what does that 24 look like? Here it is across, you'll note in green. We are not talking about coastal waters today, so I just put the 16%, but those were purely looking at the terrestrial land-based portion of 30 by 30. So California is about 100 million acres, and so with 24 million acres preserved, that puts us right at 24%. Math is nice and easy. It's actually 101 million acres, but we round a little bit there just to make the overall stats easier. But we're looking at about 6 million acres to go in terms of protection. So a common question at this point would be what counts as conserved? And so there are a couple of things that we'll walk through here. And these are things that we'll be asking for your feedback and making sure our data is accurate. But in terms of if everything were as accurate as possible, what counts as conserved in 30 by 30? So first of all, the land must be permanently protected. That can be as a fee title property that's owned or through a deed. It can also include conservation easements. Once the property or park meets either of those criteria or both, it must also be in the CPAD or CCE databases. So in order to account for that property, we need to know it exists and that it is fully protected. And so that happens through the GIS databases that we have that we'll be talking more about. Once you have the property protected, you are sure it's in either or both of those databases. The 30 by 30 measure that's being used for biodiversity durability is what's called the GAP code system. And we'll start to talk about that more, and this will be something that we talk more and more about over the coming months. But GAP code 1 and GAP code 2 are those that qualify to be counted as 30% in the 30 by 30 effort. GAP code 1 and 2 at a high level are formal management plans for the land that emphasize biodiversity on the land, and they retain natural land cover within that property. They're looking to retain 95% in general in terms of the amount of natural land cover retained within that property. So the two databases where the property that is protected needs to be in are the California Protected Areas Database. This is where we track those lands owned in fee title ownership. And this is for lands protected for open space purposes. So this is a broader database than what CNRA counts as 30%. As I said, CPAD and CCED are used by multiple other efforts, and sometimes you want a broader definition. Whether you're working locally or regionally, you may want to include different lands than are included by 30 by 30, and that can be complementary, so we allow for that. The second database is those of conservation easements. Those are maintained in a separate database because they are a bit unique. There's more information that's kept confidential. So things like landowners are not named in there unless agreed upon. And also the properties might not be the full parcel or ownership of the land that's subject to the easement. So we do have the two separate databases. They have been in existence for about 2 decades at this point, and there are a lot of resources online at calands.org where we keep information about the databases. You're also free to download and use those. Those are freely available. And as noted, both CPAD and CCED are more expansive than what's going to qualify to be in 30 by 30 and qualify as the 30% metric. So one of the key things today is that we're trying to get the message out that we know both databases need improvements and additions. They are thought to be the best in the state, best state in the US. We do participate in the CPAD US national effort. All this information does roll up to the national level, but we're dealing with 1,000 agencies and nonprofit organizations. So there are a lot of things changing on the land as people protect more areas, but there's also a different sort of diverse set of agencies and organizations. So some folks have higher capacities to submit that information to us once they protect properties. Others might not have GIS capacities or just the time to get to this sort of housekeeping effort or getting lands tracked. So what we're trying to do is make sure to get the message out that we always want to improve the data set. We feel that those groups and organizations that protect the lands know them best. And so we would like your authoritative input to improve what we have in the database or make sure that it looks correct as is. So we'll go through later a little bit how you make those contributions, but please know if you look into either database and you find something that needs change or updating, we're happy to hear that information back from you and then continue to improve the databases. They're released twice a year. So once you submit edits, we get those into a queue and we aim to get most updates made within a calendar year of when they're sent. Sometimes we can do that sooner, within 6 months, and we'll go through some of that timeline later in the presentation. As I noted, CPAD and CCED are a little different than 30 by 30. And sometimes that's intentional and sometimes it's a lack of information or data. So on the right here, I have a map of the Bay Area so we could zoom in a little bit and see some of the differences. But you can see the dark blue and the light blue areas are those that we have in CPAD and CCED. So those are known protected properties either through fee title or easement. CNRA is shown in green. So this is what's being counted in 30 by 30 currently as protected. Now we know that sometimes properties are not included in 30 by 30 and they shouldn't be. So maybe a small pocket park with a playground that is not oriented towards biodiversity. It's extremely important for recreation and local use. But in terms of biodiversity, it's not going to qualify for the 30 by 30 effort. However, a lot of these areas in the blue, as folks in the Bay Area will know, it's actually a lack of data. We haven't had information submitted to us from the organizations or an authoritative source that says these are actually managed for biodiversity. So we need to get that updated, and that's what we're hoping to do in the coming months. Once we update CPAD and CCED to say that they are qualifying, aka being GAP 1 or GAP 2, that will roll into the next update that CNRA makes of the 30 by 30 effort. So CPAD and CCED, just to be clear, are the base data that go into the 30 by 30 processing that then result in this green layer in the end. So within there, we've talked about GAP codes a few times, but I wanted to ask folks how they felt about GAP codes and what they know about them. So let me launch that poll. And so here we go. What do you know about GAP codes? Do you know nothing? You've heard of them maybe? You understand them, or you're an expert? And if anyone's an expert, I'm going to be emailing you. I'll just warn you. Just kidding. If someone claims to be an expert, I will be surprised. All right, we're already at 85% participation. So let me end that poll and share the results. All right, so the majority of us have heard of them once or twice. And then a fair amount know nothing, and some think they feel they understand them, and no experts. So not surprised. But this is good to know. A lot of folks are falling into, I've heard about them a little bit, probably just enough to make you nervous. At least that's how I started out in this process. So let's go into that a little bit. We're not going to go extremely deep. We could write PhDs on this material, but I want to start to step you into the process slowly, knowing that over time we'll revisit this more and more. But biodiversity protection in 30 by 30 is something that is conserved with a GAP code assignment of 1 or 2. So GAP code 1 and 2 are meant to be ways that measure durability of biodiversity protection. So it doesn't actually have to have the presence of biodiversity. Say you're restoring it to that process. It still qualifies if you meet the 2 requirements. One is that there's an active management plan for the land. The second is that within that active management plan, your aim is to protect on the order of about 95% or more of that with natural land cover. So those are the 2 key critical elements. There's a lot more nuance within it, but these are the sort of first 2 criteria that you can start to think of. Will my lands qualify as GAP 1 or 2, therefore be in 30 by 30? First of all, do you have a management plan? And secondarily, are you prioritizing natural land cover protection or restoration? So we know that this information, as I showed on the previous map of the Bay Area, is currently limited in our databases of CPAD and CCED, and sometimes it's just wrong. How did we get there? This has been a staged effort with the state to roll this information out. This started with a national effort. So PAD US is the National Protected Areas Database that includes both fee title and easement properties. And they are able at the federal level to reasonably well assign GAP codes. And the way they can do this is looking at the agency that is owning and or managing the property and different types of classifications. So if you're a national park or refuge, there are different ways that they can start to blanket assign, and it works reasonably well. It still needs review, but the properties are much larger and therefore fewer of them to be reviewed, and you can assign these GAP codes. But that really doesn't work on the local level, as most of you have seen that have looked through it. If you look at your properties, you're a little confused as to how or why they got these assignments. Part of that is what comes from designations, like a wild and scenic river would likely qualify you as a 1 or a 2, but those really don't spatially align well. There's no clear source of getting that information into CPAD and CCED without the input of local agencies. So what we're doing again here is asking for your help, saying, if we can provide you information on how to better define what GAP 1 and GAP 2 qualifying properties are, could you please review your lands and tell us when and how much of those properties you think that you have and manage qualify? So we'll go into the detail of that, but knowing that what's currently in the system was known to be a first pass, and it was taking national forest, BLM, those types of properties were the first ones that were classified with these GAP code systems. And it has left us in this situation where we now know we need input from you folks all on the call to get your data correctly represented in the data. So I do have, and like I said, these slides are available after the call, but we'll walk through the actual text of each of the 4, and you can have the link here down below in the future if you're interested. But GAP 1 is the most protected. And sort of the key elements are here that it's protected from conversion of natural land cover. It has a mandated active management plan, and you're aiming to retain that in a natural state. The key part of GAP 1 is that you're allowing disturbance events of a natural type to occur, or you're mimicking them. So that would be something like fire is allowed to proceed or is mimicked through the property. GAP 2 is very similar, where you're going for 95% or more protection of the property from converting it against natural land cover. It's a mandated management plan. It does allow for some either management of, for example, fire might be suppressed in some areas if that's appropriate for structures or other things. Or maybe an insect outbreak needs to be controlled a little bit. So there's a little more nuance or leniency there within the types of events that occur or natural disturbances on the property. But again, you have an active management plan where you're looking to retain or convert back to 95% plus natural land cover. So those are the two that qualify in 30 by 30. For reference, I do have also here the GAP 3 status. This goes down to the majority of the area. So instead of around 95%, only about half of it is protected against conversion of the natural land cover. And then it can also allow for other intensity use, either localized intense uses such as mining, or more broader and not as intense such as logging or HOV use. This does also include a section about endangered and threatened species that might occur on parts or all of a property, can help assign it the GAP 3 status. And then GAP 4, a little bit unfortunately, is a collapsing of folks that don't meet those criteria of 1 through 3 or are just unknown. So oftentimes 4 is actually representative more of an unknown or no data at this point than it is of saying that it actually doesn't qualify. So how are GAP codes assigned? This is a pretty complex dichotomous key that folks will have access to. We have it up on our website. It'll be through the slides and other avenues that you can get access to it. But what we've tried to do is take, USGS had a few resources, but they didn't quite feel refined enough to us to be able to really assign GAP 1 through 4. So we've tried to both simplify and clarify the language that at least at a high level could get you to the right ballpark of what GAP code you think your property is. So we won't walk through all of these today, but this is one that in future webinars, I think that there could be whole discussions on some of these sections. But these are the sort of the language points where they make determinations of which way you fall. But the nuance of that will need to happen in conversation within some of the community. These are not the only parts of 30 by 30. There are also what are called other effective area-based conservation measures. So these are things that just don't fit in the GAP code system per se. These can be areas that are critical and essential also, but they might be temporary. They might not primarily protect for natural land cover against that conversion, or they might also be really small, like a wildlife crossing could be a critical property, but a narrow, strip or bridge or wildlife corridor can be hard to map at this level. So there definitely are still things that are important that are out there that are not going to qualify, and these tend to fall with, they're called OECMs. But today's effort is to say we really want to focus on getting those that we know should qualify under the GAP code system properly accounted for, so folks know how they can make sure that that's happening. And this is the actual text of the pathways document about what OECMs. The examples here can be helpful. So organic farms, community gardens, and other things that might fall under an OECM. And as I noted, CPAD and CCED are not just for 30 by 30. There are a number of other things, and hopefully, likely some of you have also been using it in your work. I did want to just highlight a few of those things. They're longstanding databases that have been around for a few decades with many uses. And so as such, and in order to remain relevant, they're flexible. We have things such as like a special use flag. So if you wanted to remove golf courses, because most people aren't going to consider those important to their work, they can be. But for some folks, if you're looking at recreation and it's a publicly owned golf course, it can be important. So we try to make the data flexible and useful to different folks and different types of work they're doing. So if you're focused on recreation versus biodiversity versus water protection, you might be taking different elements out of the databases or not. We aim to make it sustainable. So we want folks to be able to give us input once and have that go out to many users. So you don't have to resubmit your information to multiple people. Instead, we have one statewide database, and then once that's updated, that rolls out to everyone who uses comprehensive protected land. So you might have your own properties in your own GIS system. But if you're looking for what's happening around you or at a regional level, this is a way to say this is what all the agencies are doing. And all of that is just meant to be that this data is useful to a diverse audience. So when you provide us updates, we get hundreds of downloads every time we do a release. So there are many people, academics, folks working out in the field, all sorts of different people who will get access to that information and those updates that you make with us now beyond 30 by 30. So some of those examples in the Bay Area, the Conservation Lands Network is built off of and makes use of CPAD and CCED. Recreational efforts such as the California State Parks, the OGAL's Office of Grants and Local Services gives out grant money, and it uses CPAD and CCED to determine who has recreational resources in their neighborhoods or not, who's lacking those. And then also one of the more recent Los Angeles County measures, Measure A, looked at park equity also, and that made use of CPAD and CCED. So by updating this information with us now for 30 by 30, it will roll into that, but it will also roll into many other efforts and folks who are using the data. So this all comes back to the fact that we need your input. If I was going to ask Claire and Kay, is there a need to go any questions at this point from the chat, or should we continue on?
To date, there's nothing in chat yet, so feel free to go ahead, and I'll just remind folks, feel free to put any questions in chat and we'll pass them on.
Great. All right, so here's the main bulk of we need your input. We've told you that a few times and you're probably ready to hear how that happens. So let's go through that. I did want to call out a few important things is that we know we're dealing with hundreds, if not 1,000 or so agencies that will be giving us information, and you're all going to have different ranges of technical capacities. So when we started this effort in particular for the 30 by 30 effort, we really are looking to be systematic. So we want to allow tools and files and things that will be useful to you to have, but we also know that we need to be flexible. Like some folks are not going to want GIS files and be able to look at them or use them. Some people may want a table, some people may need a map. So we're trying to find this balance, and we'll continue to make sure we're striking that balance, and we welcome your input if and when we're not, of being systematic so that we can pull information in from hundreds of agencies that can be a bit time consuming. So we want to streamline that process, but we also want to be flexible enough so that we're not excluding someone who needs to give us information. And then in terms of data verification, as I've said before, we trust that you all know your lands best. We just do sort of a high level QA verification to make sure that what we think you're giving us for information is flowing properly into the system, so that it's used by 30 by 30 in the way that you think it's supposed to be, or other efforts. So making sure that that's represented right and there's not sort of a technical glitch in the way that something's been entered. So those are sort of our guiding principles as we move into how it will happen. One thing that we have developed in our offering, which is now available online through this link here, is what we're calling a 30 by 30 toolkit. This, I think, is going to be primarily useful for folks who either know a little bit GIS, but not a lot, but would want to look at those files in that way, or just want to look at a table. If you're very savvy, very into GIS, there might be other nuanced ways we can go through getting your reviews that more efficient for you. But we'll talk through some of that. But the toolkit is meant to be an introduction to, if this works for a bulk of groups, feel free to use it. So we'll walk through what those elements are. And what you can do is pick and choose out of the toolkit what is useful for you. So who we're trying to reach, or our audience, is everyone on this call, plus those other agencies who don't happen to be here today, but agencies, nonprofits, organizations who manage and protect lands, and you want to make sure they're accurate. And you want to make sure that they get reflected right in 30 by 30. So if that's you, we would welcome you downloading the toolkit and either making use of that or reaching out to us if you need additional help. What's going to be in it? There will be instructions. We have online instructions. You can download them in PDF. So we have it online so we can update as we get feedback or questions, so we can continually make sort of the toolkit itself dynamic to answer requests or questions. But we'll have sets of instructions. We'll also have videos such as this and more in-depth webinars. We'll have links to USGS resources of what are GAP codes, what are the definitions. So all of that information we're trying to bundle and make available to you. And then there'll also be files. There'll be those that are GIS friendly sort of shape files, also tables and or just maps for folks who are not going to want to use GIS, but really need to review and analyze if their properties are correct. So if you go to this link for the toolkit, it will load the CA Lands website. And what we've done here is we've created zip files for each individual agency. So if you are assigned as the manager of a property, either in the easement or the fee database, it's been zipped up into a zip file for you. Now you could go and download the full state database for either or both CPAD or CCED. We welcome that. Our intent here was that if you're looking just to update your properties, we wanted to give you just a small subset. And so instead of tens of thousands of records, you would just get those relevant to your agency. And we've really narrowed down the attributes that we track about those properties to those key pieces of information that will make 30 by 30 and most people who use the data very accurate. So making sure the very core information we have for your agency is accurate as possible. So when you go to the website, we have the search tool. If you want to do a keyword search, you can also browse through all of the 1,000 and some agencies to pick the zip file or files you want to download. In this case, I'll walk through an example of the Nature Conservancy. So I just put in Conservancy. You can see the groups that show up. And then the Nature Conservancy is one we'll walk through here. So if you are a GIS person and you feel like that might be the right way for you to review your lands, you'll download that zip file. You would unzip it and put it in the working directory that works for you locally. And what you'll find in it are 3 shapefiles. You'll find a shapefile of the properties we have assigned you as a manager for ownership, so CPAD, or those where we think you have an easement, so CCED. Those can then be pulled into your GIS software of choice, whether it be an Esri, ArcMap, ArcPro, QGIS, or any of those elements. When you pull the property in, that will then allow you, if you're a GIS user, to bring in any other relevant layers you might have. So if hydrology or roads or topography, any of that information is critical for you understanding that it's accurately represented, this will allow you to bring those layers in. I'll note in this property, we have sort of 2 different layers shown. The highest level is this thick green, which is the full park or property. This is the Dangerman Preserve, just for reference. But we also have these smaller pieces within, which are generally thought to be as parcels or holdings within the park. So if your park or property you want to represent it just by one large polygon, that's fine. You can use this larger dark green one. If you find it more useful to have the detailed information, maybe on different parcels, you have different management plans or things, you can also look at that more refined parcel level or holding. So either or both are available for you there. So when you pull that information up, if you found perhaps this parcel should not have been included, you can simply make those edits right in your GIS system, edit the actual file that we have sent you and change it to what you feel is more accurate. And then when you return that back to us, we'll do a change analysis. You don't even need to flag that you've made a change. We will just review each record that comes in and say, has this changed or not? So just simply go through and make the edits as you see fit. If you had your own GIS layer, you could snap or align to that, or you could just send us your own. If you have your own shapefile that you feel is better and you don't want to recreate it, you could just send the shapefile you already have. Along with the spatial revisions that you could make, these are the key attributes that I talked about. So the name of the park or the property is really helpful for a lot of folks to have in all different types of work. The level of public access, this is whether the public is allowed to go there or not, or if there are restrictions such as a permit needed to go there. It will list you as the managing agency. This is where you could also tell us like, no, actually, we don't manage this property, someone else does. And that would allow us to change that and put it to the correct agency. One thing that we have here is the year of establishment. If you know the year the park or property became protected, this is incredibly useful. sometimes we don't learn about a property being protected for a few years. If we know the date of when it was actually happened, this will allow for a time series analysis. So we've been building this out over the state. The Bay Area is pretty robust. Parts of LA are also getting quite good. But the more and more we can track the year of the property protection, that will allow us to show how it actually changed over time on the landscape. And then we give you the acreage just so you have a concept of how many acres we have assigned within that property to make sure that that looks accurate or not. You can edit both the shape, as I noted before, any of the attributes within that direct file, and then send that back to us. And this is one where we will have a webinar that's more in detail walking through how this process happens. This is a high level, how we envision the process happening. So if you think this is for you, but you need more help and assistance, that will be available. For those of you who are not interested or willing or able to use GIS for whatever reason, that's also fine. We have an Excel table here at the bottom where we can, in the toolkit, you will find a table listing all of the properties that you manage, both fee and easement again. So in this case, I've just pulled up the Nature Conservancy for consistency and shown the Jack and Laura Dangerman Preserve. You'll see the same attributes that we talked about just on the previous slide. So the name, the level of access, that you're the manager. So that information can be filled out. Now we find most folks are probably still going to want a map to look at because maybe, you know, the acreage might be helpful, but you want to make sure it's showing the right areas. Also, so there is a link here which opens this map on the upper right. So you'll see it open straight to this property because I've clicked that particular unit. And so it will show you on the map how that looks. So this is one way that if you're working on the tabular version, you can see a map of the property. I'll show a few others in a minute here. But if you found you wanted to make changes, you could submit changes on this online application if you felt like that was the right way for you. It does offer some editing tools and submit information, or you could simply just put it in the Excel table directly for us saying, you know, the shape is wrong. Maybe you have supporting documents or parcel maps or parcel numbers. Any of that information can also be provided to us. So this is meant to call out, again, the key pieces of information we're hoping you can review, and if they're inaccurate, get us back that information. Again, you don't need to track what you're changing. Just when you feel like you're done, send us back the information, either the table or the shape file. And that one will be another potentially the same webinar for folks who want to choose, or separate webinar for folks who know they don't want to use GIS, how they'll go through that process in more detail. So the toolkit itself is what's actually in those zip files that you download. So that'll be your shapefile and your table information and instructions. We do also have supplemental materials that we're happy to provide. So maybe you don't want to use the online map tool that's linked on the previous slide. We can provide individual PDF maps of the properties we currently have for you. So if you have 30 properties and you say, I'd rather just get 30 PDFs that show a map, here are two examples I've shown for CAL FIRE where they have something in a CPAD with the various parcels that are included within that unit of Boggs Mountain Demonstration Forest, or also for an easement, we can provide you a map of that that shows the parcels that are included within, in this case, the Rainbow Ridge. So in addition to the shapefile and the table, there are the options for these types of maps. We ask that you email us if you want those. We did not put those in the automatic sort of download zip file just because it makes the file size really large. So we didn't want everyone to be cluttered with files that might not be necessary, but these are a scripted process. We're happy to provide them. We actually already have them all staged and ready. So we're happy to email or post those for you if you would like. If you're more comfortable working in Google Earth, we're happy to also convert and send you information in a KML or a KMZ format so that you can view it in that way. The other thing is we don't want to create extra work for you. If you already have information in another format that is useful, we may be able to just use that. For example, if your properties can be defined by APN numbers, we're happy to just take a list of your APNs and we can generate that shape and then show you how that looks to make sure it's accurate. And then also if you have your own existing maps or reports or other documents that describe your properties, we're willing to accept those to work from also. So it doesn't need to be the toolkit itself that is used. Like I said, we're trying to make sure that we're flexible enough to accommodate other the needs that all of you have and also the time constraints that you have within your work. So those are all acceptable options. And you're also able to just email us and ask questions if need be. The one thing that we didn't talk about in those editing processes were the GAP codes and how those are assigned. They were shown on there, but it was definitely a high level overview because we know that's one of the harder things. So just recognizing that the actual inclusion of your properties in the databases is a pretty straightforward process for us. We've been doing that for decades and we're quite comfortable and nimble in doing that. The GAP code assignment is going to be, for most folks, the more challenging part of this work, determining and picking that up. We do think that that's going to be something where we're working with CCLT and trying to do things like working groups where people with similar types lands come together and aim for what we call conceptual consistency. So, you know, you can say, I think that this property I have is probably a GAP 2 and this is why, and hear from other folks if they're landing on the same decision. So we're looking at folks being able to have their own authority to assign their own GAP codes, but then being able to work together to make sure that they feel that they're consistent is possible. A couple of common questions we've had the few times we've talked to folks is how they're being assigned. So you can assign acreages either by saying, you know, I have a 100-acre property and I want it all GAP 1. You don't have to tell me where it is. So if you say, oh, only half of my property counts as GAP 2 and the other part is GAP 4, you don't need to tell me which half. You don't need to spatially define that. You can just say 50% put in GAP 2, 50% put in GAP 4, and we put those acreages there. They're not actually spatially assigned just because it's too difficult and hard to maintain. So essentially we're looking for the numbers there, not the super detailed mapping it out. If you have that, we're happy to work with it. That's pretty rare, that at least from what we found. And yes, that means you can have mixed GAP codes on a property. So if you want to look at an individual parcel and provide mixed information in terms of GAP codes, you could have 4 GAP codes all existing on one parcel or within one whole park. We're flexible. That system has been built so that you're able to do that. So when you go through the table or the shapefile, what you can do is assign us, say, I know this property is this many acreage, please assign these percentages to any of the 4 GAP codes. So that is the overview of how GAP codes will happen. Like I said, we know the actual, on paper, they're 1 through 4, which seems quite simple, but in practice, actually assigning and picking those 1 through 4 hard-coded, you know, you don't have a 2.5 is where things become difficult. So we do want to recognize that's an area that we're going to need a lot of community input and dialogue and discussions around. And then I'll get to timeline here so we have enough Q&A time, but basically the next time CPAD and CCED are released are mid-year. So if you get me information that you want updated by the end of, I think we put May, we'll try as hard as we can to get it in there. I can't promise it because I actually have no idea how many of you are going to send me how much information. So I can say that we will get it in by the end of the year. And the reason that that's okay, or at least we're hoping it's okay, is that's the next time CNRA will use the data to update 30 by 30. So CPAD will continue and CCED to have a release in June, but CNRA is not running an update until the end of the year. So we will get as much as we can in as soon as possible to allow you to sort of test out the system, see how edits come out of it. But the real deadline here to making sure you're in the next 30 by 30 update is telling us your updated lands by October 31st, whether they be spatial edits and updates, attributes about those properties, and or their GAP codes. And then they anticipate taking that December, CNRA being they will take that and late this year of 2023, and then in spring plan to release the online update data where you would see all those changes come into the CNRA system where you've made updates. And then I did have one last poll if folks are ready. Let me go back to that, which is what kind of support? So we do hope to offer a lot of support through this process, and just interested, you can click all that to apply here. But if you were thinking about now you have to actually start thinking about this process and doing this work, what would be most useful for you? So having training sessions on using toolkits, making videos, sort of a resources library, any of those options that seem to work. And we can also use this as a way to navigate towards the chat about what questions you have and how we make sure we're having the right resources available. So I will now say I have not looked at the chat as I've been busily talking. So I'd like to hear from you all, questions and concerns or anything else that's come up.
Amanda, this is Kay, and right now, folks, go ahead and put your questions in. I've been getting a few questions just sent to me directly, and so they're not in chat. But what's being asked by a bunch of folks is those of us with agricultural conservation easements.
Mhm.
How are those being counted? What do we need to be looking at? And how do we get them counted?
Yes. Well, so there's sort of two answers of that. Well, two conceptual. The first is that CPAD and CCED most definitely always aim to include those because we know they are critical. Just putting 30 by 30 aside, we want them reflected as broadly as possible for anyone doing conservation, recreation, whatever these other types of work for CPAD and CCED. So we definitely want that all in there. In terms of how they fit into the GAP code system, I think that's going to require a very definite working group for those to come together and discuss. The conversations I've heard, which I'm definitely not authoritative on answering this, but things about grazing versus row crops, organic farming. So those are the types of things that I would hope to see in those working group discussions. And I think those are also times where we would probably come out with questions or inviting CNRA staff to participate to help us find those answers in those sessions. So yeah, that's part of it's hard and we want to help you as we learn together through that process.
Thanks. Someone's put one in here, large scale. Any idea if addition of lands not counted yet will reach or exceed 30% of CA lands?
We did some sort of back of the envelope guessing, and no, I don't see it exceeding 30. I think to me, the thing that sort of stuck with me when I looked at that was how critical even something that's consider a smaller property is to the actual biodiversity of the state. So yes, we'll get closer to 30 once we get the data corrected. I don't anticipate it being that we're at 30 or surpassing it yet. But it's really critical to me, even if one property doesn't manage the percentage point up, it is critical for California's success in many ways. So that's sort of a nuanced answer there.
It's a good one though. Whitney's asking, her question is, what if we have already submitted data on our lands to CNRA via the 30 by 30 submission form?
Oh, yes, thank you. I wish I meant to bring this up and I forgot, so I very much appreciate it. So that was the precursor. So we did get and will continue to get updates from CNRA if you fill out that submission form. You do not have to do that anymore. If you prefer, it is more direct just to come straight to us. So I did just get an update from Nate at CNRA earlier this week. So if you had just recently submitted, I will start to get that now. And you will then receive active outreach from us, as will many groups for many different reasons. But the short answer is if you submitted, we did get that, but you're also still welcomed into this process, which will give you more ways to engage with us about it and actually get it done.
Great.
That was initially intended by CNRA to gauge how much was needed.
I bet they got a lot.
Yes, we also got sideline notes from folks. And I will share the poll results here. Just in terms of, it looks like people want broad support across a number of different things, which is great to hear. And also open to ideas as you're working through things and things come up. Do feel free to let us know. Any other questions here from the group or?
There's nothing
concern?
currently in chat. Anyone else have anything they want to think about now?
And also, if anyone is interested, I think, can folks unmute themselves?
Mhm.
Dialogue is also fine. There's 30-ish of us, but
Yeah, I think people can unmute themselves. I'm not sure.
Or maybe it's just all so clear. Everybody's ready to send me their data.
Well, I will say too, while we're waiting, if you want to say something and you can't unmute yourself, raise your hand or put something in chat, and I think Claire can unmute you. And Claire just, or I think Amanda just put in some email addresses here and some links. You've also got the CCLT email, calandtrust.org. I think Claire will stick it in the chat for us. And you can email us here and we can work directly with Amanda, or you go right to Amanda to help and see what we want to do next. We are offering this same thing tomorrow. And we will get, as we said earlier, we'll share the slides and we'll get it up on the CCLT website. And I think one of the next things we'll be working on is kind of establishing working groups, if folks would like to do it that way. I know there's a lot of interest from ag land trusts on this, so that will be, I'm sure, at least one. And so you can let me know, or you can go directly to Amanda on what you think would be the next best steps for you.
Yeah, and a couple of questions here I just saw in the chat. So clarifying how you send data. If you feel you're ready to send data and you already have data, you can just email it to this location here. You can email me the data directly. You can send me an FTP site, or if you just have questions, you can email it there. The next step on my side is I'm in the midst of developing the webinars that we'll start offering very soon, of like actually walking through using the toolkit. Today was a very high level overview of what you might expect to find within there. So if you're interested in that, that will also be coming out shortly and will get announced through CCLT. And then also another question, which is, if I'm understanding the toolkit correctly, we would assign our own GAP codes to our lands. Yes. You get to assign your own GAP codes to your own properties. That is, yes. And it can be done via the shapefile. It can be done in the Excel table. And you can also contact us if there's a better way that's going to work for you and you need help.
Amanda, I can't thank you enough. As deep as I'm into this, this is so much information and so much great information. Really appreciate it, and appreciate your willingness to help us walk through this and get a better understanding, get an accurate portrayal of protected land. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you tomorrow. And anyone here who wants to join us again tomorrow for another layer of this information, please do. And Amanda, I think you're seeing it in the chat. There's a lot of folks saying thank you. This has just been fantastic, very helpful. And I know that it's a part, and it's a big part. We really are appreciative.
Well, and thanks to all of you doing the hard work of protecting the land. So that is that's the most important in my mind. So I really want to try to help make it as seamless as possible. And it's not always easy. I can't promise easy, but as easy as possible to make sure your information is accurate and goes into 30 by 30 as it should. So, and anywhere else that uses the databases. So thank you all for the work you're doing out there and getting it protected.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all your hard work and your dedication, and we'll see you soon, and send us your questions.
It looks like we did get one more question.
Okay.
Chat, if you want to hear that.
Yeah.
Kelly asked, is the submit error report through the CPAD map collaborator a method we can use to update the GAP code?
It is. If you find you're already in there, our instructions do include like sort of the best ways to do that. But yes, if you note it in the map collaborator application, we will use that as GAP input information. So yes.
Great.
And I'll hang out for a few more minutes if there are other last minute questions that come up.
All right.
Looks like most folks are headed off.
Yeah. Well, it's so much information, you know, it's great information. You make it very, very real and very tangible. It's just a lot especially for some of us who aren't in the spatial data element, you know, and so I'm trying to grasp it. And I know I had two staff, I think Amy and Emmy are both still here, you know, I think folks who are in it more, this was even more helpful. So.
Yes, it's definitely a full-time job, folks, so we don't expect everyone to inherently understand. Looks like we had one other question
Yeah.
on how long to incorporate changes.
Mhm.
So we hope any information we get by the end of May, we hope we might be able to get out in the June release, but that does not go into CNRA because CNRA, well, sorry, that will go into CNRA, but not until December. So the state is not updating 30 by 30 until the end of the year. So we will try to get it updated sooner in CPAD and CCED, but that depends on how many edits we get in the meantime in the next month or two. But most definitely you will see that edit reflected by December 2023.
Okay.
And hopefully the slide is helpful for folks who want to reference back on that.
Thank you. Any other questions from folks?
We're probably settled here.
Looks like we're good. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. And we'll see folks tomorrow. And we hope to hear from folks, and we'll be putting a word out on some next steps.
I can stop recording.
I
if
think
we
that'd
don't
be great. Thanks, Claire.